Hello, hello, everyone. Nicole here from Team Amelia. Please let me know in the chat if you can hear me or not. I'm not sure if this is working, so I just want to double check. Hi, it's Nicole from Team Amelia. If you haven't met me before, hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a licensed EC judge, dressage judge, and competition coach, and an FEI rider. If you haven't met me before, nice to meet you. Amelia is usually the one doing these Thursday night lives, but because we are in the middle of our 5-day free riding boot camp, she actually has an evening Zoom VIP session tonight. So she could not be here and asked if I could step in. So I'm happy to step in. Oh, good. Amanda saying in the chat, loud and clear. Fantastic. So I'm happy to step in tonight for Amelia. We are very similar in the sense that we use a lot of the same theory and things like that. But what's great is sometimes I say things in slightly different ways. And so it sometimes sticks with people a little bit different. So sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a different lecture. Tonight, we are talking all about contact in the training scale. I've got my little shoelace here to go through some contact stuff with you. If you are not participating yet in the boot camp, we are on day 2 of 5. And if you're feeling like maybe you want to participate, there should be a link around here somewhere. And if not, and you're feeling like, no, that's too much commitment, 5 days, we are having a training scale webinar free as well on Sunday. A link should also be around here somewhere. And so you're welcome to attend both. They are great sessions, wonderful, wonderful training. If you've ever felt frustrated because you don't know why your horse is responding a certain way, or you don't understand why a movement isn't working, or you can't figure out why your horse isn't more rideable, the training scale is the way to help you. It is a framework. It is tried and true. All the top riders use it, and it systematically helps you develop your horse. So let's get into the topic for today. I do have a few questions that have come through, but if you have questions as we go, please feel free to ask them. As I said, if you're just jumping on, I'm Nicole. Nice to meet you from Team Amelia. And we're going to go through contact in regards to the training scale. So quick recap of the training scale. The training scale is a system that we use. It's shaped like a triangle. Some people also call it the training pyramid. And the idea is we should spend the bulk of our time on the bottom of the pyramid. And as we go our way up, this is like the pinnacle of everything we do at the top, but we don't spend that much time there. So the different levels are rhythm, suppleness, connection, impulsion, straightness, collection. And the idea of it is that through using this framework of always prioritizing rhythm and then suppleness and all the way up, we can make our horses more rideable. We make it so that they can carry themselves in better balance with better posture, which then in turn builds the correct muscles so that they can do more intensive things, whether that be pirouettes, whether that be endurance riding across terrain, whether that be jumping meter jumps, whatever it is. Using this framework allows us to build our horse's muscles and top line to make their gaits nicer to ride and easier to ask things of them because they're physically able to carry themselves better, and thus making them more fun and more enjoyable to ride. So it really is a cool system. So rhythm, suppleness, connection, impulsion, straightness, collection. All right. So where does contact come into this? And this is kind of interesting because when Amelia was talking to me, she's talking to me about this session. She's like, I want you to talk about contact in the training scale. And I was like, oh, great. Because originally the training scale was in German. It was developed by the German cavalry. And so all the words that we have are German words, the original words for the training scale. And the third rung was originally translated to be contact, not connection. And contact, in like their German word that they used, was supposed to be support, mimicking contact. Now, it is true, that is what the third level is, but we changed it to connection. And when I say we, I don't mean me. I mean the powers that be of dressage, the FEI, USDF. Connection was a more true or closer accurate translation to what the German original intention was. So you've probably heard the word connection before, and you've probably heard the word contact before, but what are they different and how do they work and how are they in the training scale? All right, so contact refers to the bit, the line up the rein to your hand all the way to your elbow. And now that does not mean bit necessarily. You can do it with a bitless bridle and things like that. But it is that line, that continuous elastic contact you have from your elbow all the way to the bit. And that's really important to remember. That's not just our hands, it's all of that space. Whereas connection is the recycling of energy and the elastic feeling from the hind end to the front end. So I like to think of contact being just the front, like the front part that we're thinking of with our reins, whereas connection is the elastic through the whole body. So they're both very, very similar. We want them to be elastic, we want them to be following, but they're separate. And contact is for sure part of connection, right? So let's dive into this a little bit more. When we talk about contact and connection being the third rung of the training scale, how does that work? Well, when we have a steady rhythm that allows us to theoretically trot around with our horses or canter around with very little contact, they don't need to be slowed down, they don't need to be kicked forward, they're rhythmic and going forward. Then when we add suppleness, that allows our horses to bend left and right, laterally, as well as longitudinally over the back, forward and back. So we can send our horses forward and we can bring them back. We can turn them left, we can turn them right. And then that comes into contact and connection. So if we have a steady contact with our reins and we're able to have that rhythm and then the suppleness, the horse then is able to bend from the inside leg to the outside rein and from back to front. And that's where we get roundness. Everyone's probably heard about roundness and why it's so important, right? So you might be thinking, okay, that's great, Nicole, but what if I can't trot my horse without contact and things like that? That's totally fine. Contact is still a part of rhythm and suppleness. And I think that's one of the key reasons why they changed the third level to connection, because it's a much better representation of how we actually ride and train our horses. We still have contact at the first and second rung of the training scale, right? Very few of us can just trot around without any contact safely. But it's as we go up through the levels with contact and then going up into connection, which then gets that roundness. I don't see any question from you, Amanda. You're saying you have a question. I don't have it there. If you could mind just putting it there in the chat again. I don't see an earlier message from 5 minutes ago. Sorry about that. So that is how connection and contact relate into the training scale, right? And so don't be upset if you don't have contact in the sense of connection yet. That is something that has to develop once you have rhythm and suppleness. And you'll never get your horse truly round and connected from back to front until you have rhythm and suppleness, regardless of the contact that you have. Oftentimes what I see riders doing is they're trying to fiddle with their contact. They're trying to kind of get the horse a little supple on the inside without thinking about the rhythm and the suppleness with their legs and their body before they get the connection, right? So what makes a good contact? We want a nice steady rein, right? So if we go back to my shoelace, if this is your horse's head over here and this is our reins, right? We want it to be nice and steady. If it's steady, that means I can use my fingers to do little manipulations. I can do my wrist or I can use my elbow, right? If I've got no contact or a loose contact, it's harder. You can see I can use my fingers here or my wrist or my elbow, and very little happens over here, right? That's why we want that steady connection, so that the communication with our horse's mouth or face is much clearer for them to understand. And then they can hear the more subtle cues, like your fingertips wiggling or your wrist and then your elbow. Whereas again, if you have loose connection, you can't really hear that, even that, but then they can hear that, right? And if you're listening to this on podcast, I'm doing a cute little demonstration with a shoelace. So please come back onto Facebook or YouTube to see it. So that's that steady contact that we're wanting, right? But that's hard to achieve. So it's sometimes that we have to work our way up to that. So then you might be asking, okay, well, how much weight should I have in my contact? Which is a great element. We want to describe it as, we want to have it soft, right? But you want to be able to encourage the horse to take and go stretch into the bridle. That's our longitudinal suppleness, right? So what I like to say is imagine you're holding a toddler's hand. There's going to be times when you're walking with the toddler where you can have it quite loose and gentle. And then there's going to be other times, like when you're crossing the street or the toddler's having a hissy fit, that you're going to want to be a little bit tighter, right? It's just like with training. That's just like what it is with training horses. There's going to be times and moments where you can be softer, and there's going to be other times where you have to be a little bit tighter, but you always want to try and go back to that gentle softness feeling. Some other examples I've heard for descriptions are like if you're holding a baby bird, or an injured bird, you want to hold it tight enough that it can't fly away or escape, but not too tight that you crush it. I don't like that example as much because how many of us have actually held a baby bird? Whereas a toddler, most of us have experienced a toddler of some sort, right? The other description that I've heard is you want to have the weight of a soda can, which I don't love the idea of that one. I know Amelia uses it a lot, but I also, as you're doing different things, you're going to have different weight in your hand, and the soda can never changes like the baby bird or the toddler, right? But essentially, we don't want them leaning on our hands. Sometimes what happens, and if you have a horse that's heavy, what happens is they end up pulling on you and leaning on you, and then you pull back to keep them from going up. And then they end up having what we call a fifth leg, which is their neck and their head. They use that as a fifth leg or crutch to maintain their frame. And that's where you have to go back to rhythm and make sure the horse is self-maintaining in the pace that they're going without influence from your rein or legs. Lisa's saying, nice visual explanation. Oh, good. I'm glad. I dug this out and I was like, I think I have a shoelace that I can use. So perfect. The other thing that we want to think about contact as we go through all different movements, whether it's shoulder in, leg yield, whether we're jumping, whether we're turning, we want to have steady rein contact. We don't want one to be loopy. We don't want one to be super heavy or things like that. We want it to be even. And that will also play in later when we talk about straightness, way up at the top of the training scale, right? So the idea is that it's fairly even as you go through, and then as you get up to higher requirements of different things that you're doing, like a pirouette, you're going to have to be more focused on the straightness, right? But essentially, like, in the lower levels, if you're turning around a corner, you don't have complete contact on one rein and no contact on the other. You still want to have contact on both reins. The other thing that we talk about with contact is how do we use our reins in regards to asking questions for our horses or encouraging them to bend and supple. It's important to remember whenever we're using rein aids or leg aids, we always want to start with the softest aid and then go up incrementally if they can't hear us or they're not understanding us. So for example, if this is our horse's head again, and this is my hand, I should hold it like a rein. We always first want to use our fingers, and then we want to use our wrist, and then we want to use our elbow. If we always go to our elbow, that means that the horse is always having the biggest amount of pressure on their mouth, and then they never learn to listen to the small aids. You always want the small aids to come first so that it can be like a precursor to the bigger or heavier aids. Also, while I've got my handy dandy hand here, I thought this would be interesting. This is something that I feel so silly. I've been riding for decades now, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I hadn't been doing this. But everyone's always taught, thumb on top of your reins, the bottom rein comes out between your pinky and your ring finger and everything like this, right? And I'll show you here like this. But what some people don't realize is that you should be holding the pressure of your reins up here between your thumb and your forefinger. So you should be able to let go of your fingers here and the rein not go anywhere. And the reason why we do that is so that we can use these fingers to then send cues and signals down to our horse's mouth. If we're holding on to them like this with light contact here, we can't go any tighter, right? And then plus that's when we get sore hands and things like that. So always think about that your pressure can be here. You don't want your fingers open all the time for sure, but they should just be resting quietly. But the pressure of the rein and holding the rein so they don't slip should go there. Some people find that if they have stoppers on their reins, that's a really nice indication so that they can feel it right there underneath their thumb. Great. Let's see, what else have I got on my list? Oh, yes. The other thing about contact, which is super duper duper important, is we want to make sure that our contact is always following with our horse. The same thing with our seat aids. We always want our seat to be following and absorbing the motion of the horse first before we can start applying aids with it. The same thing is true with contact. So again, this is my horse's head. This is me as riding. In the walk, if you notice the horse is just walking out in the field, they have an oscillation of their neck that goes forward and back. The same thing happens in the canter. In the trot, it's much more steady, but we go up and down, right? So it's our job with our steady straight contact that as the horse's neck moves in oscillation, like if their neck is going this way, that our elbows follow the motion of the horse. So imagine if I don't have contact, right? And some people think like, oh, if I don't have contact, I don't need to be following so much about my arms and what they're moving. Well, then what happens is then the horse hits themselves as they hit the end of the oscillation of their neck. So even when you have loose contact, like in a free walk, you still want to have your elbows following, right? And that's the same thing in the canter. You want to have that nice following, which is much harder in the canter, right? Because there's a lot more movement. And then in the trot, we want to think about as we're going up and down, our elbows are going to hinge with the contact. Sorry, that's a little hard to see there. But then essentially as our body goes up and down, our elbows are creating that hinge. So it's actually more like this with our hands staying still rather than the contact going up and down. That was a better, I should have thought that one out through a little bit more. So elbows moving up and down. Sorry, I'm a little awkward with the way the camera is, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the following motion you should have with your contact. And here's the thing about the training scale. You can never have connection, remember that recycling and elastic energy from the back to the front, if you don't have the elastic following contact in your elbows in straight line to your horse's mouth, right? So all contact is a precursor to connection. So remember that. Hopefully that gives you an idea. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I feel like this is a lot of theory for you guys who are listening in. So feel free to ask questions. Let's see what else is on my list that I didn't want to forget to tell you guys. Oh, yes. So a good example of whether or not you know you have contact or connection is when you look at the training scale in relation to the show levels. There's a jump between training level and first level, where in the directives, training level says you have to have acceptance of the bit, whereas first level, you have to be on the bit. And in my mind, that's a very clear example of contact versus connection. So acceptance of the bit is that you have that nice steady contact with your rein, but the horse doesn't have to be round. So the horse's nose might be out, the horse's nose might be up even, or back even, but the bit is being massaged in the mouth and loose, and the horse isn't resisting the reins. And you still have a little bit of that developing that elastic feel of your following in the different gaits, but the horse isn't round. When the horse goes round and lifts the back and the pelvis tips and the horse's neck arches and the horse goes on the bit with their forehead on the vertical, that is connection. You also still have contact, remember, but that is a showcase of connection. Great. Awesome sauce. Well, I think that's come to the end of my little theory about contact in the training scale. Hopefully that's all made sense. A quick recap: rhythm, suppleness, connection, impulsion, straightness, collection. Contact is part of connection, but also appears in rhythm and suppleness in practice when we're schooling the training scale. In addition, our contact should be soft, like we're holding a baby bird or a toddler's hand, but it changes depending on what we're doing as our horses develop and what situations we're in. We always want the contact to be oscillating or absorbing and elastic to have that steady contact so that we can use the lightest aids possible to communicate with our horses. Hopefully that is a good recap for you guys. I am going to get on to some questions. I only have 2, so feel free to ask some questions because I have a few more minutes in the chat. Amanda is asking, there's a lot of info on possible harm for polo wraps and boots can do to the lower legs through generating too much heat, and that the legs should be bare instead. Any thoughts? That is a great question, Amanda. There has been a lot of studies that have come up, and the Netherlands have started to make some new rules and things like that, the Netherlands National Federation. In my personal opinion, it really depends on what you're doing, your horse's experience level, and the climate that you live in. To a certain extent, if you're riding cross country, I think I'd be more apt to wear boots on my horse's legs and things like that. So because there's more of a chance of interference and hitting trees and things like that. And you're probably not going to be in such extreme heat temperatures that the damage to the tendons would be there, right? Whereas if you're going for a trail ride and you're just walking and maybe a little trotting and it's really hot summer day where you are with high humidity, then I'd probably opt for bare. So in my opinion, it really depends on what you're doing and your horse. Some horses have a preference for boots versus polo wraps, or vice versa. Some horses that have splints and things like that do better with polo wraps because it's more of a customized fit than boots are. So I would say to use your best judgment based on what you're doing. For me, it also depends, because I live in the Pacific Northwest, it also depends on how muddy my horse's legs are, because sometimes in the winter, no matter if you hose them or anything like that, you can still get grains of mud and dirt underneath the skin. And I don't like putting boots or wraps on over top of that because it gives sores. So great question. Emma is asking, the lesson horse I ride likes to put his head up, but also have moments of walking with a really nice frame. My question is, how do I keep a steady contact and pressure on the rein when my horse switches from putting his head up and down all in the same time? That's a really great question, Emma. And I think that goes back to when we talk about contact versus connection, right? Because contact is that steady elastic feel regardless of the horse is on the bit or not, whereas connection is when they're in that round frame, right? And there are different degrees of frame, right? From training level all the way to Grand Prix. So what you want to think about is using the rhythm and suppleness to get the elastic contact. So when you're walking around or trotting or whatever you want to do and you're warming up, if you have a little bit of contact, there's a difference between having a loose contact like this, where it's very loopy, versus having a loose contact like this, versus having a contact that's steady and elastic like this. I hope you guys can see the difference, right? So like 1, 2, 3. So what I like to do is, if I'm just loose rein walking, I don't, horses meandering, let them have a free walk, right? And then when I start to put them up to work, I shorten my rein so that I'm just starting to feel the horse, and my arms are oscillating. And then basically what you do is you have your rhythm. So that's that steady, self-maintaining energy that the horse is going, right? And I'm feeling the contact with the mouth as we're oscillating in the walk or in the trot or canter, whatever you're doing. Let's use the walk as an example. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to use my suppleness, lateral first, because we always start with lateral suppleness, to push the horse sideways, bending inside leg to outside rein. And essentially what happens, and then from lateral suppleness, you get into longitudinal suppleness. But what happens is essentially, instead of me taking the contact and making it taunt, see how this is me up here, this is the horse, right? Instead of me taking the rein back, and that's when you have backwards thinking hands, which is so easy to fall into. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my legs to supple the horse and push the horse into turns and bending lines and over the back. And then what happens is the horse stretches and pulls it. And that's when we get the reaching to the contact. And I actually can feel my hands moving a little this way. And that's very hard to do because this is still happening at the same time, right? So you have to be able to be oscillating while also pushing the horse's legs forward so that they can pull with stretch into the contact. And that's why inside leg to outside rein is so, so powerful. And everyone always says it's the key to life, because that's where you get contact, the elastic, nice contact, not just gentle contact, right? So if your horse is, you have a nice contact, but the horse goes up and down and moves over and things like that, it can be hard. Go back and focus on your rhythm. Count the walk. Does the horse speed up? Does the horse slow down? Usually something is going on with the tempo or the rhythm if they all of a sudden are popping their head up or down, because they need their neck to balance. So when there's a change in the footing or in their tempo, like I said, they will use their neck to balance themselves until they have the muscles on their top line so that they can use their back muscles and their core muscles to hold themselves in that frame. And that's where it gets really cool, right? Like I was saying, you get more rideable and adjustable because the horse's development is there. So go back to your rhythm. And the other thing you can do is take your hands a little wider, right? And I know that's hard to see with my shoelace in this description, but when your hands are a little wider, you're essentially shortening you're taking more contact without taking it back. So then the horse has a little bit of ability to go up and down, and you can be much more subtle coming in and out without having to shorten and lengthen your reins. Ideally, we have our hands nice and close together, just like if you're texting or reading a book, but that's not always easy in practice. And so, but really, really, really focus on your rhythm and suppleness first. I don't want you riding with your reins all the time wide, but that is something you can do to help greener horses, or as you're establishing the rhythm and suppleness, to get them to encourage them to stretch into the contact a little bit more. So great question there. Mary Ann is asking, my horse blows and sneezes all the time, and she takes a bit out. Should I let her or should I keep the contact? That is a really good question, Mary Ann. And that depends a little bit on your horse and the situation that's going on. So sometimes it's very genuine. The horse is warming up and they start to blow or cough or sneeze, and then they pull the reins out of their hand. If it's an honest cough, I would, probably what I would do is, remember thinking back to our contact and we're just holding with our thumbs, I'd probably, if the horse went and coughed a little bit as we're warming up and she just kind of gently pulled the reins out of my hand, I'd probably be okay with that if it only happened at the beginning of the warm up. But what I would do is I would feel that through her back, because I'm focusing on my rhythm and my suppleness, so I can feel when she gets a little tense in her back. And then what you can do is, as you anticipate she's going to cough, you just soften your reins so she can gently take it and stretch into it, and then you can bring it back. If it's being a little bit evasion, a little bit naughty, which we often see with tiny ponies, because children don't have any core muscles, and so the ponies learn that they can stretch and lean and then get the reins, right, as the child goes flying forward. If that is the case, then what you want to do is, as you're feeling it, you want to then create a little bit more contact, do a little bit tighter, and as they go to reach, you just give them a little kick and a little push forward and send them into the contact and push them forward into it and kind of say no. So you have to gauge on what is happening exactly and what's going on with your horse. If your horse is continually coughing while you ride them, I might chat with your vet about it just to see and make sure that nothing's going on with them. The other thing you can do, there are drugs and medication to help them feel a bit more comfortable if they are coughing continually through your riding, and that would be more comfortable for them anyways. Great question. B. Will says, that happens with my horse during the trot warm up. Yeah, and that can happen, so they're eating their hay on the ground. They might have a little bit of dust in their lungs. It might be, as we go into summer, it's dustier weather. So it can definitely happen, but if it's happening continually through your horse's ride, I would probably just check in with your vet just to make sure everything is all good, or if there's something you can be doing to help your horse feel a little bit better. Great question. Lorelei says, would wider hands help with my horse who throws his head up in the canter depart? It could, for sure. I would be more inclined to add a little bit of leg yield feeling and get a little bit more bend from the inside leg pushing into the outside rein in the canter depart. Because when we think about it, right, when we talk about having our steady rein contact, right, and we're pushing them from the inside leg to the outside rein, the horse will naturally stretch more into the contact. And then what you can do is, as they're stretching into that contact, you can ask for the canter in that moment. And then they're already rounding their back and moving into the canter depart. And remember with that, it's degrees, right? Because every time they're doing a canter depart, we want them to tuck their butt under, lift their back and lift their thoracic sling, which is their shoulders essentially, not to use their neck to throw their head up. To get the canter to throw their head up, to bring their shoulders up to get the canter lead. So remember that as you're developing your horse, it won't be a perfect Grand Prix canter depart in balance. You work on degrees. If it's just the horse lifts their head a little bit as they canter and it's an improvement onto their regular, that's an improvement and you should be happy with that. But I would probably more say leg yield into the contact. If you need to widen your hands slightly to help with that, that would probably be okay. But again, ideally, we're not riding with our hands out like this. I would probably say, if you're feeling like you have to in the canter depart to keep your contact with your reins that wide, I would probably do more trot work, and I would do more forward and back, more longitudinal suppleness work before I went to the canter, because then that will help the horse stretch into the reins without you feeling like you have to widen them to shorten them. Yeah, great question. And I think we have come to the end of the questions, and I'm just fiddling now with my shoelace. I've had a lovely time with you guys today. One more question, and then I will be off. Lisa says, are you constantly readjusting to keep the consistent connection? Great question. So it depends what you are doing. Remember that connection is the elastic recycling energy from the hind end to the front end, whereas contact is just from the horse's mouth to your elbow, right? So what happens is, as our horses are doing things throughout the ride, They get tired, they spook, we do tighter turns, things like that. And if we are progressing our horses correctly, focusing on our rhythm and suppleness, what actually happens is our reins get shorter and shorter because the horse is lifting more through their back and their head is coming in, not because we're pulling them back, but because they're coming back because they're sitting more on their hindquarters. To answer your question, whether you're adjusting your reins all the time, not necessarily. You want to think about your rhythm and suppleness to your steady contact. If you're finding you're having to shorten your reins all the time, that probably means that they're slipping out of your hands. So then you have to go back to focusing on how you're holding your reins. And then remember that connection, the amount of connection or roundness you need is dependent on the exercises that you're doing. So if you're just doing 20-meter circles, you can have a horse that's in a longer frame with connection, right? Because connection is just the recycling energy and then energy from the back to the front, right? It's elastic and supple. And then as you go and do more and more things, whether it's shoulder in, whether it's half pass, whether it's 10-meter circles, the horse's frame has to condense more. And they do that through the building of the muscles that they've done, right? Through the training scale. And then what happens is they become shorter in their frame and sit more in their hindquarters. And then that's when you get your reins shorter. So if you have a horse that is more physically developed or has once been more physically developed and has an understanding of the things you're asking, you might find that your connection or your rein length is changing and your connection and the size of the frame is changing because of the exercises that you're doing, right? So a 10-meter circle, you're going to have the frame a lot more close together than a 20-meter circle, right? But typically speaking, we wouldn't, if we were working on an exercise or working through a pattern, we wouldn't change it. Like if we were doing a snowman, which is a 20-meter circle to a 10-meter circle the other way, we wouldn't let the horse go more out on the bigger circle with their frame unless we were trying to encourage longer steps or do something else, right? That being said, if we have a horse that is physically not as fit, but was once well developed into the FEI levels, oftentimes that we get that with schoolmasters that maybe they have a year or two off, and then they come back and they're riding at a first or second level fitness level, they can sometimes hold the more intensive or more collected movements for moments before they need to have a break and go longer again. And that's why we give our horses breaks in between their work. And that is also why we do stretchy work before and after our middle schooling sessions, because we want the horse's muscles to stretch and relax and elongate again. What a really good question. Okay, I am off. Okay, one more question because Margaret has one more question, but then I really have to go, okay? Because I'm not supposed to go over 30 minutes. Amelia makes me promise. Margaret says, my horse keeps breaking into a jog with contact when walking. Okay, great. So what you're going to do, Margaret, remember what I talked about, how you can have free walk, you can have gentle contact, and then you can have contact here, right? What sounds like is happening is your horse is walking, and then you pick up you're walking like this, you pick up the contact, your hands come back, and the horse's neck shortens. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on your walk rhythm. You're going to count it out. You're going to be on a bending line, and you're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to pick up the reins just till before you feel the walk rhythm change. And so it might be here, it might be here, it might be here, wherever it is, just before the walk rhythm changes. And then you're going to keep counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you're going to put them on a bending line, circles, serpentines, figure eights, anything like that. And then what's going to happen is they're going to stretch into the contact and they're going to take the contact up. Keep in mind, he might, need more breaks if he hasn't been used to that, using those muscles, because any change in tempo is an evasion. And that's why we go back to rhythm. So always go back to rhythm first and then go your way up the training scale. Really great. Okay, now I'm off. Have a lovely rest of your day. If you are part of the boot camp, we will see you 8 a.m. with Amelia in the Facebook group. It will be pinned to the top of the page. If you're not in boot camp, you are welcome to join us for the next few days. Or if you'd like to join us on the training scale, training scale webinar is 12 noon Pacific time on Sunday. It's going to be uber fantastic. I've seen the slides. I'm so excited for Amelia to share this with you. All right.